This is the 23rd edition of the Tiny Lab Talks. Today we will discuss digital games and their relationship with the scientific and social culture. Tiny Lab Talks are briefly informal talks between researchers invited by the University of Aveiro and researchers from the University of Aveiro through the American Corner program on the topics such as technologies, innovation, research, and culture. This conversation will take place here in the University of Aveiro American Corner Lab with the support of US Embassy in Portugal. My name is Veloso. I'm a professor at the Department of Communication and Art and a digital game researcher at DigiMedia Research Center, also here at the University of Aveiro. And with me is Peter Brinson. He is a game developer, a filmmaker, and a professor at the University of Southern California. And from the University of Aveiro, Mário Vairinhos, he is the current director of the Master in Digital Game Development, a partnership between the Department of Communication and Art and the Department of Electronics, Telecommunication and Informatics. Welcome both. So let's discuss a little bit here about the present. As I present, Peter is a game designer and a filmmaker and also a professor. What are the challenges you face coordinating these two challenge activities in your life between academic life and the artistic career?
My biggest challenge centers on who I am in relationship to my students. In particular, there's a conflict between two ideas of what university is for, an undergrad university in particular. Professionalizing them so they can become good workers. So for example, to become good at making video games is very hard work. To practice and polish their skills takes years and years. At the same time, the other value of college is to become critical thinkers who are not going to be fooled by tyrants. So these two things are both ambitious. And it's hard to squeeze it into all 4 years. So as you become professionalized, like good at coding and good at working with people and sort of learning how to conform and make it easy on others, that's not always the same thing as being skeptical of groupthink. Because a lot of what I think college is for is to come out and say, I don't agree with what everyone is saying. I have a reason why I think we're going down the wrong path. And so balancing those two is something I think about every day.
Thank you so much. Mário is the director of the Master in Digital Games Development. And in your opinion, what is the central add value in higher education in game development nowadays?
Thank you, Anna. I'm glad to be here. I want to thank you for the invitation. This is an informal talk, but I'm not going to be very informal. I'm going to be a little bit boring because my English is not that good, so I'll be reading my thoughts just a little bit, if you don't mind.
It's okay.
Okay, advanced training in the area of digital games allows students and future specialists in the area of multimedia to envision interactive and immersive environments from the point of view of ludicity. Nowadays, activities carried out on interactive environments, such as education, training, logistics, cultural activities, and many others, are by nature hybrid spaces, mutually involving both physical and digital tasks. We can think about the museum experience, for instance, where the visitor is embodied in the narrative discourse that shifts between the physical and the digital communication of artifacts. So, I think the starting point of ludicity is special for thinking the user experience in these spaces, because ludicity articulates several concepts, such as interactive storytelling, game mechanics, and the magic circle, which are decisive to make the user experience in these environments richer and denser for the user. The articulation of narrative and ludicity is an added value, especially if you think about the shift in direction that technological mediation has undergone towards virtual immersion and technologies that incorporate the physical world, such as Internet of Things and augmented reality. So, games have shown their potential in this field by adding new layers to interfaces beyond just perceptive immersion, such as narrative immersion or ludic immersion, as proposed by Murray and later by Ryan. So I think this is what I think is the main contributes for a master in ludicity and digital games.
Thank you so much. So, now I have a provocation for both of you. Eric Zimmerman considered the 21st century the ludic century. In his manifesto for a ludic century, in his words, the last century was the era of moving images and information. This century is about digital games where the information has been put at play. What are your thoughts about that, Peter?
Well, I agree with his characterization of this century being about playing with information. And I also like how he says the 20th century is about the moving image, but the way I would recharacterize the 20th century a little bit, because I do like cinema, I love cinema, is to understand it as this medium that got us to think about the individual and got us to think about who we were after God was no longer the main storyteller, I think, in the 20th century. And so getting to when I watch a movie, I ask, who am I in this scenario? I watch another movie, who am I in this scenario? And after 12 movies, I might say, I think I know who I am in these different scenarios as an individual, my values, why I cry, why I get in a fight. It seems reasonable that now in the 21st century, we're finding communities again. They were looking back at each other and building, okay, maybe I'm an individual, but I want to, in these online communities, something's going on in these online communities. I don't always understand them myself, but we're going back to that. And when we make playable systems, we make games, it's like we're taking our thoughts and the way we play with our own thoughts, putting them into these board games or video games and seeing how you play them, seeing what you think of them, I'm surprised you played my game that way. And so it's a little bit like very, very slow telepathy, like really awkward, and download this thought, play this thought, upload this thought. And I think that's getting us ready for the 22nd century, which is clearly going to be about telepathy in art, right? So I click in this and I have thoughts. And I think that will probably, when that first starts happening, we'll be back to a certain celebration of the individual, which is certain people's thoughts will be a lot more interesting than other people's thoughts. So there'll once again be a Picasso of, reading somebody's brain. Maybe I'm dull. When you read my mind, that guy's not very interesting. But someone else is super interesting. And so I think that we're right now getting to know what it means to share our thoughts. And you can see it's a mess on the internet right now. I think that we're like little children when it comes to playing with each other and manipulating each other on the internet is something I hope that games can help us. Or for me, video games are the better part of digital interactions compared to, let's just call it out, social media. Not a big fan. And now artificial intelligence, since it seems like it's the new thing, yes. I think that we're interested in asking, what is it? How is it going to affect us? How is it going to change us? It's about thought. It's another mind. And I hope we can figure out what it is before it figures out what we are, I suppose.
Thank you, Mario. I totally agree with your thoughts. I think we live in the late 20th century. We lived in the era of information, but now we materially have this civilization going on. So let me just be brief about some of the ideas that I wrote about this provocation. I think it's a very good provocation. I think serious games are actually a good example of this, that games are moving towards information. And facing with the phenomenon of pervasive computing and the Internet of Things that I already mentioned, social media games can serve as a mediation for contextualizing big data. We have a problem that our technology is producing a lot of data, and I believe that games can serve as a mediation to contextualize what is important and what is not important for a user on that specific time or that specific activity. So there's a good chance of opportunities for games to become important in this context. However, let me say that the idea that everyone will become an active protagonist in a digital and connected society was a very popular idea back in the cyberculture literature in the late 90s. Derek Kirkov, McLuhan, Baudrillard, Fusser, and all these guys, Pierre Levy, Derek Kirkov, they stated already at that time that the world probably will move from like cinema, representation of the world, for a simulation of the world itself. The ultimate expression of this idea was evident at that time with movies like Existence and Matrix, where characters lived in a game and the category of real and simulation exchange status. So it's not a very new idea, but it's happening with especially in serious games.
Thank you. So, continuing the provocation, in the same manifesto, it says that everyone will be a game designer. Should we think like game designers, particularly our students? Obviously, our students that are attending a course in game design, they will think as game designers, but the other students, those are in neighbor areas, scientific areas, why they have to think like game designers? It will be helpful.
Of course, I think the game students should learn how to be game designers.
Yes.
I am a big fan of everyone becoming literate about games, to understand how they work to the point where you understand what they're doing to you when you play them. I think everyone should be at that threshold. But I don't want everyone to be a game designer. I don't want Donald Trump to be a game designer. I mean, I think he would eat us for lunch. So like we take storytelling. I live in Los Angeles, and storytelling is reasonably held up as like this wonderful way of organizing emotions and ideas. And but some people tell really powerful stories and hurt the world. I can list some famous European leaders who are really good storytellers, and we wish they hadn't been, for example. And so I want us all to be able to read games, but I'm scared of some people being very good at them.
So, Mário.
Most of my answer is already answered. My first thought is that every student, especially in game design, should think as a designer. And this idea of a do-it-yourself attitude, it's becoming more pervasive in education. So I agree with the manifesto. Actually, I think this part of the manifesto is very poetic. I think Zimmerman enters in a very poetic part, and it's very beautiful, these sentences. And the idea is conceptually, I think, is very good. This idea that is blurring the frontiers or the borders between who make games and who is playing the games. But reminds me also another American thought thinker, Norman in the idea of design user gap. You know, the design user gap. He stated that in the late 80s that there is a gap between the mental models between people who develop and design technology and people who use it. So this is a very symptomatic. It stays there. This question between this gap, and it appears again in the realm of games. What I think artificial intelligence could do, it's materialize this. And imagine that one day we get home tired from a hard day of work. We sit on a couch and ask the artificial intelligence agent to create on the fly a new world where I can play in a scenario and story invented at that moment at my pleasure without, however, having any knowledge or skills of any kind in design or development. I think this is going to happen, and we are offering a course in a master in design and development. So we should be looking at this.
Okay, thank you. So the clock is ticking, and I have to move on. So I have two more questions, and I will ask you briefly answer to both. First one. This is also the century where popular mass media outlets still attribute violent acts to video games. However, there are multiple research projects showing the opposite. What do you think about this?
You can go first this time. I don't really.
Well, to being honest, I think in Europe it's not an issue. I think, but I could be wrong. I think the violence game is not an issue like in United States. I think here in Europe actually in research it was established that people can take apart from what is violence in a simulation environment and in real environment. But in a country, in the context of a country, there are so many guns. This could be actually a problem. We cannot just rely on it's deeper than this. Okay, so but in Europe, I don't think it's a problem. I think the problem in Europe about games is more about looking in the more indulgent way, societally look at games not like because they are fun, they are not serious and too much screen time. Let's ban games from schools and houses and homes. So I think it's a more real thing, these kind of problems here in Europe than the violence itself.
I read the New York Times, the big newspaper in the United States, or one of them, and it feels like every month there's an article publishing some science that red wine is good for you. And I can't help but think that the editors are really like, oh, that's a good story, let's put that on there. Really hoping that red wine is good for you. And I often think the same thing, like we're really worried about the how games can make us violent. I do agree with Mario that like there's probably about 5 things that go wrong when someone gets seriously violent, whether it's their background, their genetics, and so on. And in the United States, the last 2 variables can, I think 0.1% of people can be affected adversely by video games. But the question is, do they have a gun? And you can have all these variables happening for you, and you can live 30 years of your life, and then one day go from a non-violent person to a tremendously violent person if you have all these going. And I think I'm certain that most of us are not affected by violent video games in this way, and I think a very, very small percentage are.
Thank you so much. So, the last question for both of you. What is the future of digital game-related research? What do you think about this?
I think that VR is probably great for creators and other specialized fields, but I think we have this wonderful opportunity to study AR before it actually happens. So remember back before phones came out, smartphones came out in 2008, I didn't predict what would happen. I didn't see this coming. I mean, look at a science fiction movie from 20 years ago. They're flying to Neptune, but they pull the phone off of the wall, right? And but I think we see AR coming, and we see what it is you can imagine in the next 10, 20 years, it's just no AR, and you don't know what I'm seeing. And so studying the mind and the psychology of what it's like to be with someone, and I'm talking to you and you have your glasses on and you're actually not, you're playing a game right now. And I don't even know you are. Or you're looking at something stupid on social media, or you're reading something that's more interesting than me. But it seems like we're ready to go ahead and study that. Like we can already do simulations. Imagine as a teacher, I'm looking at my students and they're giggling and I'm thinking, are they playing a game together right now that's called like make the teacher make a mistake and they all are playing it together? I don't know. So the idea that I don't know what you're going through, I'm trying to guess what your mind is like, I'm trying to guess what your mind is like, and AR is going to complicate that. And so it's not my field, it's not my expertise at all, but I would go ahead and do experiments with people with some sort of version of playing with what they're perceiving versus me not knowing what they're perceiving. Particularly as games could be a manipulative version of that, or it could be a wonderful version of it.
Yes. So, Mario.
Well, I agree. Artificial intelligence is going to be the big elephant on the room. It's not just the big elephant on the room, it's everywhere. But that question, I hope I have the answer, because if I knew the answer, I'm going to make my research on what's going to be the big problems in the future of research in games. Before internet, no one see that coming. Well, we see internet, but in the beginning of the 90s, but we didn't realize it's going to be a big revolution. And I think artificial intelligence is going to be one of these things, in my opinion. So probably most of resources in research in subjects will move into that area, not just generative, but everything that we could think about it in design, in development. That's going to be, of course, a trend. A more short time, in the short time, I think probably virtual reality interfaces, haptic interfaces, locomotion metaphors for solving these kind of problems between mixing virtual environments with real ones. How that data from Internet of Things will be embodied in the games, in narratives. I find this very promising, but I can only guess.
Thank you both. Thank you so much for participating. We also thank the support of US Embassy in Lisbon for this possibility. The following tiny talk will take place soon. Stay tuned to the American Corner social media and don't forget to attend. Thank you so much.